I'm just gonna come right out and say it. Turn-based combat is not for everyone. Final Fantasy fans are completely split over loving and not loving turn-based battle sequences. And that sucks. So for those of you who would rather not go through a bunch of menus just to wait for your attack, I came up with a list of Final Fantasy games that do not use turn-based combat. Now, if you actually want to look at it from a really technical angle, only the first 3 Final Fantasy games are actually turn-based. So I guess the very first games I'm going to bring up are actually any of the Dissidia games. Honestly, it's a series that I don't actually know a whole lot about, but the one thing that I found was supremely interesting about the Dissidia series was the narrative. I loved the idea of taking a character or two from every Final Fantasy game and sort of shoving them into this one game. And it's very action-based. If you look at a screenshot of the game, there's just numbers flying around and words flying around and everybody's flying around. Everything's flying around. And the thing about Dissidia, the people who love the Dissidia games, they're so in love with the Dissidia series that it almost intimidates me to sit down and play them. But there's been several people who commented they knew enough about the story to where they could make counterpoints to what I was saying. And in truth be told, I don't know enough in order to really use it for any good right now. If you were to pick them up and play them, there's no turn-based combat systems to be found anywhere. And the next one on my list was released last month, and that is Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core. I played it, and I was a massive fan. The problem is, I haven't played it since then. I really should probably get back into it, maybe. But the thing is, all of it, the combat systems, going through and exploring different maps and different environments that felt familiar because they were in Final Fantasy VII already. Whether you were exploring or battling, it all felt good. It all felt really smooth. It felt a little bit more intuitive than the Dissidia thing, for instance. For me, I can only speak for me. And for me, it also felt like a natural transition between traditional RPG battling systems and this combat system that we were definitely sort of leaning towards. Final Fantasy XII. So I thought I would offer up my 2 cents on Final Fantasy XII and the battling system. I'm not 100% for sure that it's technically turn-based. I don't know, but I'm gonna bring it up anyway. I'm not 100% sold that it is or isn't. It's sort of a weird in-between. Before Final Fantasy XIV came out for console, in my mind, this was the closest battling system to sort of replicate MMORPG combat systems. And like, I was really confused as to why when you made a command, there would be this string or something that went from your character to the enemy. And also, whenever you choose commands, the action on screen completely stops and you're able to sift through the menus to try to find what you're looking for. So in that kind of way, it still has a little bit of the ATB system, but not also. Gosh, it's so strange. And in Final Fantasy XII, there was not a transition between exploration and then combat. It was one of the first Final Fantasies to introduce that idea, if not the first. And games like Secret of Mana and Legend of Zelda and those kind of games, they've been doing it for centuries, but any mainline Final Fantasy game always had a very clear transition between what's called the field map and the battle screens. To me, that game is very mature. Not to say there are mature themes within it, well, there are a few, but it felt darker, it felt older, it felt, I get more mature is the only way I can really put it. Next up, any of the online Final Fantasies. That's Final Fantasy 11 and 14. Very clearly, these aren't turn-based. MMOs kind of have their own battling system that works for it, and it works really well. It's very, I feel like World of Warcraft really solidified the way that everything works. I can't see any way that MMO combat systems could change from what they are currently. And I also haven't played WoW in a long time, so maybe I'm really off the mark with that whole thing. Next up on my list is Dirge of Cerberus. I'm just gonna go ahead and start by saying Final Fantasy with guns, absolutely. But the game features Vincent Valentine from Final Fantasy VII, who's Final Fantasy's very own sexy vampire person thing. From what I can remember though, it definitely had its merits and it also had its flaws. But if you really love the story and the atmosphere and the world of Final Fantasy VII, this is a great place to pick up from if you're looking to not have any turn-based combat. The next game on my list, I actually don't know too much about. Admittedly, I'm still transitioning from older to newer games. But the next Final Fantasy that doesn't have any turn-based combat in it is Final Fantasy 15. I'll tell you what I have done though, is I've listened to the soundtrack, and it is phenomenal. This past month marked the 6th anniversary of the game coming out, so all that does is really tell me how far I am behind. But in watching footage of the game, you can definitely tell that there's a big difference in combat systems between games. Like, the combat system of 15 is not what it was in 13, and it's not what it was in 12, or 11, or 10, or 9. And from what I've heard, the game is fairly decent anyway. Next up, Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. This originally came out for Nintendo GameCube a very long time ago, and it was the very first GameCube game I ever played. And I enjoyed Crystal Chronicles. I thought it was a decent game, very derivative of the Final Fantasy series, but still had a lot of the same elements. And you could also spray paint your Moogle whatever color you wanted, so that was neat. But one thing I was really drawn to, I felt like the animations of the game were super smooth. I want to say that there's some sort of combo system in the battling. Maybe I'm wrong. However, if you're looking to play it, you don't have to go hunt down a GameCube in order to find it. It's been completely remastered for Switch, so pick it up and give it a go for yourself if you're wanting some non-turn-based action. And the last game I've got for right now is the upcoming Final Fantasy 16. It's been heavily documented that this game will not be turn-based. In what small amount of footage that we've seen so far via 3 different trailers that have come out now, it looks as if there's going to be a couple of different modes of combat, one featuring sort of characters that's similar to what I've seen of Final Fantasy 15. And then there's an entirely different mode where the icons or the summons sort of go at it. And from what Yoshi P has said about the game, it is going to be a non-turn-based RPG for the simple fact that they want to attract younger players. Despite the game being extremely mature from what I've seen so far. So that just inherently means more dollars and potentially more players and more people that can be exposed to the series and maybe want to travel backwards and go to the older series. I have a lot of speculations. I'm going to kind of keep them all to myself right at the moment. But everything that I've seen and everything that I've heard and read, I'm insanely excited for Final Fantasy 16 to come out. The storyline kind of reminds me of, well, what we know of the storyline kind of reminds me of like a Final Fantasy 9. It's very medieval based again. There's a lot of mystery, there's a lot of intrigue. It's very magical, and I don't want to use that word in such a way that would say like the Christmas time is a magical time, not like that, but it's very sort of magic based. And as far as the combat system, I do wonder how closely related it will be to like Stranger of Paradise. And just looking at Final Fantasy 16's combat, I am intrigued, and I do wonder exactly how it's going to play out. I am excited to see what they do with Final Fantasy 16, and this is my list. It's not complete. Thank you for listening and watching. Thank you to Buzzsprout for hosting this podcast.